Hello and welcome to another episode of DSU Inside Perspective. I'm Carlos Holmes, and this is a show where we talk with faculty, staff, students, guests, administrators about some of the current things that are going on in the world, or we talk about some of the exciting things that are going on here at the Delaware State University. This campus has what is called a one book, one campus selection. It's a book that we select each year. We require our freshmen to read it, and we highly recommend everybody else on campus reads it. This year's book is called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It's about a woman who lived in Maryland. She lived to about the age of almost 20 or 30, I think. It's a story about race, about medical research, about literacy, about poverty. It's about ethics, research ethics. And because biological science is a tremendous part of this story, I've asked Dr. Cynthia Van Golen, an associate professor of biological sciences here at Delaware State University, to join us. How are you doing today? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, I've given to understand that you actually teach a freshman seminar class in which this book is being discussed, but you also teach a cancer biology course in which you use this course. Tell us and tell our viewers, who is Henrietta Lacks?
So Henrietta Lacks is, or was, a young mother, just like many people, who was diagnosed with cancer. She knew something wasn't right, went to the only hospital that took patients like Henrietta at the time.
Since she was African American.
Correct. And poor, very poor. And so went and received her diagnosis of advanced cervical cancer. Unfortunately, at the time, they didn't diagnose cervical cancer the way we do today, and began a standard of treatment that wasn't very effective. And unfortunately for her, that meant that she was unsuccessfully treated and therefore eventually died due to her illness. At the time, it was very difficult for any biomedical researcher to grow human cells. And in order to really make advancements in scientific research, we have to have cells to use. You can't research on humans, clearly. And so there was a researcher that took some of her cervical cancer cells, and lo and behold, he could grow them in a dish. And this was outstanding for biomedical research. The problem for Henrietta is, however, no one asked permission from her family. It's not like today when we all sign consent for any procedure that we have done. At the time, they did not, and didn't even ask her verbally. So over time, there were many scientific advancements, Nobel Prizes, that came about due to research using her cells, with the family never knowing for decades. Millions of dollars were made based upon her cells, and eventually it came out who she was. In fact, for a long time, they even called her by the wrong name. Eventually, the family found out, and that's where this book comes in. Rebecca Skloot, that authored this book, was very diligent and very persistent, and finally obtained interviews with the family. And then the family got to know and got to see the cells that are still ongoing and still, growing very well today, and are used still to this day in not only cancer research but widespread biomedical research.
And the author, Rebecca Skloot, I believe
Rebecca
pronounced.
Skloot,
She did a lot of research in other areas, talking to doctors, the researchers that worked with we call it the HeLa Cell, right? HeLa Cell. They take the first part of the first name and the first part of the last name. Right. That's how we get HeLa, Henrietta Lacks. And so let me ask you this question, because you know this story. You told me your daughter used it as a project.
That's correct.
So I'm sure you've thought a lot about this. Her family, as you said, she died in 1951.
Right.
They didn't know until the early 1970s that there was even a cell line that came from Henrietta Lacks.
Right.
Her husband was still living, some of her siblings, some of her children were still living, and now they find this out. Have you ever thought about if you were in those shoes and it was your loved one that passed away, and then 20 years down the road, you find out that there's a cell line. They're making millions upon millions, probably billions of dollars on this cell line. How much is a little vial of those?
For most companies, it's $265
for a little vial.
For a vial of cells.
So they're making a load of money.
Yes.
But you're this family who is, by and large, it was a family that was economically challenged.
Correct.
Okay, struggled. And could you put yourself in, how would you feel if that were your loved one and this was your story?
Well, this is very difficult because a lot of us give, I mean, anytime they take blood, theoretically they can use it. Biopsies, now with biopsies you do give consent. But back in the day, they didn't give consent. I think the issue that comes up from Henrietta's stories and stories similar to this is more of a social justice issue. And that is that now, over all this time, it's one thing if your sample, if nothing ever comes of it, nobody's going to know. And then it doesn't become an issue. But with this particular cell line, it revolutionized how we do biomedical research by finally being able to grow cells. Polio vaccine, other types of vaccines came about, pharmaceuticals that never would have had anything to be tested upon. And that's in addition to the $265 per vial just to buy the cells. So now you're a family member that realizes that not only were there millions of dollars made off of my mother's, grandmother's, sisters, etc. cells, but in addition, all of these advances only came about because of her. But she, as I said, wasn't even called by the right name when it first came out. And so that's
kind of hard to take.
Personally, not just for the financial aspect, which is one, but also because in reality, none of this could have come about without her.
I try not to get too terribly technical on this show, but maybe you explain it to me as best as you can for laymen.
Okay.
What was so unique about this cell line, this HeLa cell, that made it reproduce in a way that they had never seen a cell reproduced like that before?
So even with cancer cells, which cancer cells have genetic mutations that let them continue to grow no matter what. But even with a lot of cancer cells, when you simply take them out and put them into a dish with things that help them grow, it's still very, very difficult. But her cells had just the right genetic mutations to let them to continue to survive and grow. I mean, they're still growing, you know, and so to grow essentially forever, which is something that just at that time had never happened before.
Well, this is a fascinating story, and on March 5th at 7 p.m. in the Education Humanities Theater, we're going to have our guest speaker series. We call it a Make Your Mark guest speaker series, and a couple family members from Henrietta Lack's family is they're going to be here, and they're going to talk about this fascinating and somewhat troubling story. So if you can be here, you should be here for that. And I want to thank Dr. Van Golen for joining us today. Thank you so much, Doctor. And thank you for joining us for another edition of DSU Inside Perspective. Y'all have a good day now.